Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll be able to view it on Standpoint's YouTube page. The link to the recording will also be emailed out to Standpoint's legal advocates listserv after the webinar. My name is Nikki Kelly. My role today is to help facilitate the webinar. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A tab, and I'll pass the question along. Now, most of you probably know about our organization already, but for those that listen to this later and those that don't know, Standpoint is a statewide organization. We are a team of attorneys and advocates working to assist individuals who have experienced domestic violence, sexual violence, and trafficking when it includes domestic or sexual violence. We also provide assistance to systems professionals who work with survivors. We do this by facilitating trainings and answering calls to our action line. Examples of trainings we do are the annual New Laws training throughout the state of Minnesota, monthly webinars like this one for advocates, and other trainings by request. Our action line is answered Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. It is through our action line that our attorneys provide legal advice to survivors, and our advocates connect callers with resources, safety plan, listen, and help callers identify possible options and next steps. Personally, I'm really excited to have representatives from the Minnesota chapter of NAMI join us today. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and as many of us know, many victims, survivors also have mental health challenges that either contributed to the abuse that was done to them or resulted from what was done to them. I have no doubt that the resources and information from today's webinar will be incredibly helpful to our advocacy efforts. So without further delay, I'd like to turn it over to Minnesota NAMI's Older Adults Program Coordinator and Community Educator, Kay King.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, Nikki. And we're doing two programs today. There'll be just a 10-minute break between them. But the first program is going to be called Get to Know NAMI. And actually, I'm going to go back to the first slide because I want you to know about our website. We are the state chapter of National Alliance on Mental Illness. We're located in St. Paul, working remotely primarily. We do three things at NAMI. We do education, we do support, and we do advocacy. We're not direct service providers, so no one on our staff is a medical doctor. No one on our staff is a psychiatrist, which is a medical doctor that has a residency and an internship in psychiatry. We're not psychologists, which are PhDs, and those are folks that have 8 or more years of professional mental health training. We're not social workers, master level social workers, can make diagnoses about mental illness. An example would be a licensed marriage and family therapist. We're not nurse practitioners or physician's assistants. There's a title called Advanced Practice RN, APRN. So those are a master level nurse that also can do direct services for someone managing a mental illness. And so we are, though, good educators, I think. And we also are first aiders that can provide the bridge to connect people to the help that they need. And today I'm going to have actually two volunteers join me a little bit after 1:30. But I always find that it's good to do some basics, beforehand. So do jot down our website. We have a national NAMI, which is based in Washington, D.C., because they also do advocacy as part of their three-part mission too. And that's, of course, our capital. And so they do advocacy at the federal government level. There's a NAMI in every state. So there's a NAMI Idaho, there's a NAMI Vermont, there's a NAMI Florida. So if you want resources that are specific to Minnesota, make sure that you put NAMI and Minnesota in the search, or our actual address is namimn.org. We have lots of classes. Nikki was kind enough to say it's Mental Health Month, and we even have additional robust classes in May as a result of it being Mental Health Month. So if you go to our website, you'll find a list of scheduled classes on different topics that may be of interest to you. I use the pronouns she and her. I'm an adult educator, but we have people on our staff that work with parents and teachers and other professionals that work with young people under 18. I have an older adult specialty. I used to run large retirement communities. So I'm the faith liaison, at NAMI. So if you belong to a synagogue or a mosque or a church, we do programming, in all those areas. And I will talk more about our resources. but let's do a little bit of kind of get acquainted with what you know. I also want to make sure you have my email, and you might want to jot this down because if you need some resources that aren't talked about today, I'd be happy to be a start, and then I'll connect you to some of my colleagues if it's something that I can't answer for you. So it's my initial K and then King. So K-K-I-N-G at NAMIMN.org. That's my email address. And I'll give it to you again at the end. So I wanted you to know our mission. And our mission is probably not so different than yours is. Justice, dignity, and that's for all people affected by mental illness, which is not just the people living with a mental illness, but that's also families. That's also professionals. And then we do that through education, support, and advocacy, kind of the three legs of our stool. And so we're also really trying to make changes in the mental health system. So the best way I can describe that is, I spend many hours of my day educating people about mental illness. And if all I did was educate and I told you about what an arms worker is, or I told you about case management or how you would access case management, or if I told you about an individual mental illness like borderline personality disorder, if there's not services out there, if there aren't arms workers that are funded, or there's not housing with services that might help someone who's living with mental illness, if those didn't exist, I could educate, but then there would be no help for you. So that's why the three parts of our mission really intertwine pretty well with each other. So here are my questions. Now this one's easy. So Nikki and Jay said that they would monitor the chat function. So this is a yes or no. They get a little harder. So how many of you had robust mental health education in 10th grade health class? And if you just put your answers in the chat, that'd be great.
I'm seeing resounding no's coming through.
I ask every class, during COVID, I probably taught 600 classes on Zoom. I get mostly no's. If I get a rare yes.
They're very rare. I see one yes so far.
We have to find out what high school you went to. So I just want you to know that even today, so if you have kids or grandkids that are, in school, there's a little bit of training. We have a great program at NAMI that's national. It's called Ending the Silence, and we do that in high schools, and we also do that in middle school, but it's just 45 minutes. It's a start, but there's so many things that have to be covered in a classroom that it is hard to make time for this. Now, since you've already told me no, I don't have high expectations for the other questions, so I'm not trying to shame you. What's the most common mental illness? If you could choose one of these and put it in the chat. Now, these are not all the mental illnesses out there. I just want you to choose one of these as the most common. So Nikki's sort of like the Richard Dawson of Family Feud. So,
Yeah, it's hard to gauge. We should have put a poll in place, but I'm seeing maybe a tie between substance abuse, anxiety, and major depression are the three that seem to be the most popular.
And I purposely don't poll. I know it's kind of fun to see what are your peers answering, but this works out okay. Now, first of all, I want to say job security for K King, okay? Job security for me as an educator. And the answer is anxiety disorders. And anxiety disorders are 3 times more common than major depression, 3 times more common. Now, substance use disorder, and by that I mean misuse of alcohol, misuse of street drugs, misuse of prescription drugs. That's what I mean by substance use disorder. That's fairly high too. It's close to major depression. Bipolar disorder is not very common, and I'm a family member. So I was born to a mother who already lived with bipolar disorder, and I just have one sibling, and my sibling lives with really severe bipolar disorder. And so bipolar disorder, though, is less than 4% of the population. Contrast that with anxiety disorders that are about 18.6% in a given year. Now, these are in a given year, right? So bipolar disorder, less than 4%, anxiety disorders, about 18.6% approximately. The other thing is that I didn't put schizophrenia up here, but when you work in the criminal justice system, and I think I think most of you would identify that that is where you do work, you will see larger amounts of mental illnesses and more severe mental illnesses by the nature of your work. If you were a manager of a housing that had services, you would see a greater proportion. If you were a case manager for the county, you would see a greater proportion. But in the general population, just general population, about 18.6% for anxiety disorders in a given year. Now, eating disorders are also a mental illness. The most common of the eating disorders is binge eating. And you maybe have heard of a couple others, anorexia, bulimia, those are also eating disorders. And I want to give you some hope. For starters, we have 2 programs in Minnesota, and some states have none for eating disorders. And one is the Emily program, and the other is the Melrose Institute. And it's good to know. You don't need to know a lot about eating disorders, but it's good to know a couple resources. And the other thing is that you can have more than one of these. So you can live with major depression and you can live with anxiety disorders. There's a pretty high correlation. Correlation's about 50%. So you live with one, and sometime in your lifetime, you may develop the other. And while we're talking about it, it's kind of good to have a concept of continuum. So with all health issues, not just mental illnesses, you can have mild diabetes, moderate diabetes, really severe diabetes. You can have mild heart disease, moderate heart disease, really severe. You can have mild schizophrenia, moderate schizophrenia, really severe. And it's good to know that concept because popular culture and the media make you think everything's severe. And the fact that you work perhaps in some of these fields, like, if someone works in, criminal justice or law enforcement or housing with services or in a clinic, or you work in an emergency room, any of the places, you're going to see a higher incidence than the general population. So take other classes from us. I teach mental health first aid. It's an internationally taught course. It's taught in every state in the United States. It's 8 hours. If you need more basics, these are just the warm-up, So what percent of us will develop a mental illness during our lifetime? So this is lifetime prevalence. I told you anxiety was 18.6 in a given year. That's just in a given year. What's the lifetime prevalence? So you have, 5 choices. Just do your best guess. Is there a trend, Nikki?
So far, the trend is towards 40, maybe 20%. A couple people are saying 50%.
Yeah. And my expectations are low. I mean, if you didn't learn this, we tend to learn information when we need it. So, if all of a sudden someone in your family becomes ill, you're going to have a crash course on learning about mental illness. So, please, now's your chance to get an education. So that's good. It's 50%. And that's why it's so important to get some basic education, because it affects many people. And just know that, even if you develop a mental health condition, does not mean you're going to have high levels of symptoms throughout your life. Even people with schizophrenia, especially if they have mild schizophrenia, they may have one incident in their life, they get some help, and they do not go on to have, additional acute symptoms. So I just want you to know there's lots of hope for recovery. Do people always get cured? No, but I always contrast that with something like cancer. It used to be that our, measurement was you either died or you made it to 5 years and then you were home free. In actuality, lots of people live with cancer throughout a lifetime. They may have remission of symptoms, but not only do they have to live with it maybe reoccurring or at a low level, but they also have to contend with side effects that are permanent. If you had treatment, you might have lymphedema or something as a side effect of something with breast cancer. Or you might have to take a drug for the rest of your life to keep, the cancer cells at bay. And they have side effects. All drugs have side effects. People living with a mental illness are more violent than the general population. Got a 50-50 chance on this one.
Ooh, we have a very confident group. They are all saying false so far.
Well, it's kind of a setup question, isn't it? A little bit, but It is false. And again, this is a bigger discussion than just what I'm going to say, but I want you to know that in general, just as a general comment, people that live with mental illness are no more violent than the general population. And there are a little bit of an exception. So if someone lives with really severe, not mild or moderate, but really severe form of a number of mental illnesses, and they're untreated is a key word here, there is about a 5% chance of more violence, okay, untreated. Now, the other thing is, again, this is very much affected by media, popular culture, and things like that. Because I think, common sense sort of says, well, Sandy Hook Elementary, Marjorie Stonewall Douglas, Columbine High School, an Army base in Texas, I think it was a Bible study in South Carolina. So you're thinking any heinous kind of thing that you can think of, you're thinking, oh my gosh, that person must live with a mental illness. Well, not necessarily. And so do know that people also do things with crime that are related to money. They also do crimes that are related to other things. So in general, we don't want to keep perpetuating a myth that, people that live with mental illness are violent. We have terms for that, and we want to really strike this from our vocabulary. Remember, from a long time ago, people say, oh, they might go postal, because at one time in life, there was a violent situation in a post office situation. But that's become part of our vernacular, and that is not helpful because we want people to get the help they need. And getting the help they need, if you perpetuate stereotypes that are not true, people don't get help. The other thing to know is that people that live with mental illness, particularly when they're symptomatic and maybe untreated, they are very vulnerable to violence, meaning that they're the victim of violence versus a perpetrator of violence. So, I don't have access to legal proceedings, but when you think back to, and this name is accurate, it's Mr. Smith, in Little Falls, a number of years ago, he was a retired person living in Little Falls, and he'd had some break-ins into his home. And one holiday weekend, two young people broke into his home again, and he was waiting in his basement. And as they broke in, he killed them and used a gun. And I'm just telling you what I read in the newspaper. And he eventually went to trial, and he actually was sentenced to prison. And so, again, it's not the nuances here, but it's that, do we know that Mr. Smith lives with a mental illness? I think that the other part of that was in the newspaper just said that he didn't call authorities for 24 hours. Okay, so they were in his home, he used a gun, they were dead, and he did not call authorities for 24 hours. So you can speculate, but who really knows if he was ill? I'm sure that they probably had a forensic psychologist or psychiatrist interview him. I'm sure that was made possible for the defense to know, as well as the prosecution. But then through the narrow window of the judge's instructions and the law, they made a decision, and he served time and is still serving time in prison. So don't jump to conclusions, I guess is my main message about this. So on average, now average means half before this time, half after this time, or some people don't get help at all. But on average, how long do people with symptoms of mental health concerns wait to receive help? Half get help before this time, half get help after this time, or never get help. I like trends.
Yeah, it seems that they're torn between, looks like 3, 5, and 10 years.
Okay. Again, my expectations are low, but job security, it's actually 10. So half the people get help before 10, half get the help after 10 or never. And I want you to know that if you waited with cancer on average 10 years to get treatment for cancer symptoms, you'd likely be dead. And what happens in mental illness is that you also could be dead, because when you have something like untreated depression, that's really a high risk factor for suicide. Untreated is, again, the key word. The other thing is that, you might not finish high school. You might not be able to finish anything post-secondary. And it's really hard to make a living if you don't have a GED or you don't have, a graduation certificate. And even if you do, it's better to have some post-secondary education and training as well. The other thing is that you could be in the criminal justice system as a result of these untreated signs and symptoms. And when you have a misdemeanor or a felony, there's many things that are affected by having a criminal record. But the two that come to mind for me, two main ones, are jobs and housing. Doesn't mean you can't get housing, doesn't mean that you can't get a job with a record, but it just makes another big hurdle. So we don't want people to get a record. So we want to connect people with help long before they would ever get in the criminal justice system. The other thing is that, just the fact that you could lose lots of friendships, you could lose quite a few jobs, you could lose marriages and partnerships, you could, relationships with your immediate family, like your parents or your siblings and things like that, you could be estranged. And so obviously, we want to prevent those sorts of things from happening. So it's really important to, again, get people the help they need and be the bridge. So what's the primary reason that people wait an average of 10 years to receive help? Now, there's 4 choices, but put the primary reason, and you can just put a couple keywords because poor Nikki doesn't have to read them all. So just a couple keywords so she knows which one you're answering.
Also, feel free to use numbers. So 1 could be access to mental health services. 2 could be feel they manage it themselves, etc. A lot of people self-managing. Stigma seems to be the second choice.
Yeah. Well, thank you. They all are true. That's why I asked what's the primary reason. They all are true. So go to the head of the class. But stigma and discrimination are the primary reason that people wait on average 10 years. And, obviously, we want people to get help sooner. That's true for all illnesses, but with mental health as well. It's that the sooner you get help, usually the better your life and outcomes are. Now, it's never too late to get help for mental illness. Let me repeat, it is never too late to get help for mental illness. But early intervention, like it is for most other illnesses, really is the best if you can. So don't ever give up. Just know that, we'd like to get people help that they need early. A few more things about mental illness, and then we'll move on to, more about resources. Is there anything that was in the chat, Nikki, that should be addressed before we go on to some additional education information?
No, but that's a great reminder that as we go along, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A box.
Thanks. So, mental illnesses are disorders of the brain, and there's other disorders of the brain. You can have epilepsy. It's not a mental illness, but it is a disorder of the brain. You can have a glioblastoma, which is a cancerous tumor of the brain, and it's not a mental illness, but it is a disorder of the brain. You could have brain injuries. Maybe they're from sports activities. Maybe they're from falling on the ice and hitting your head, or a car accident. Traumatic brain injuries are not a mental illness. But think about some of these things I've talked about in the brain. It depends where that tumor is, doesn't it? Or let's say you had a stroke. That's not a mental illness. But if the stroke is in the part of your brain that is where impulse lies, then you might show some signs and symptoms of impulsivity because the tumor is in that part of the brain. If you have a stroke in an area where speech is, then you may not be able to speak. So do know that there are ties. A traumatic brain injury can be a catalyst for someone to develop some signs and symptoms of mental illness, as an example. Now, just like that, a pancreas, use this to contrast. You can have pancreatic cancer, which is very hard to treat. You can have diabetes, which is an illness of the pancreas. You can have pancreatitis, illness of the pancreas. But those 3 things about the pancreas are not the same. They're 3 different illnesses of the pancreas, just like you can have multiple things that are a concern of the brain. Now, mental illness really affects our thinking, our feeling, our thoughts, our relationships with others, our skills of daily living. I really learned in biology, late 70s, I learned that my brain controls my breathing, my brain controls my heartbeat, brain controls my thinking, my feeling, my thoughts, my emotions, right? So I think of it as the master computer board of my whole entity. And we really talk a lot about integrated health. I mean, that's a term that I think we use, all of us. But in some ways, I see the healthcare system treating us from the neck up and the neck down. And we truly are integrated. So, you try to find providers that look at you as a whole person, give you enough time. And, that's hard to find in our healthcare system the way it's set up. It's a pretty common illness. So 1 in 5 adults in a given year manage a mental illness, 1 in 5 youth under 18 in a given year. And then you learned that the prevalence is 50% in our lifetime. It's a young person's onset. And so by age 14, 50% of people who are going to have signs and symptoms anytime in their lifetime have them by age 14. And by age 24, that figure rises to 75%. So that just leaves 25% of our population that might develop some signs and symptoms after age 24. So young person's onset. Now, we said that anxiety disorders are the most common of the mental illnesses. And let me just use anxiety since it's the most common. That actually makes these figures pretty low. It's common, and the average age of onset of anxiety disorders is young. So again, half the people by this age, half the people after this age. What do you think the median is for anxiety disorders? Median age, half before this age develop their anxiety disorders, half after this age if they're going to develop them. Can you speculate on that one? Well, Nikki, what do you think?
We're getting some great responses. It looks like a spectrum between 13 and the highest guess was 30 years old. But most people are settling maybe late teens, early 20s.
Okay, it's 11. So half by age 11, half after age 11. So if you're a parent or, you're a youth athletic coach like I am, or you work with youth in any fashion, or you're a parent, it's good to know some basics about mental illness and including anxiety disorder. Now, when you look at this list is not even everything, but mental illness can affect your decision-making, your memory, frustration tolerance. So when you think to, let's say difficult callers on a phone, or you think if you've ever worked a customer service job, I mean, you sort of do now, but I mean, customer service like retail or fast food, or think back to some of those jobs you had, and you see some of these things happening, and you're like, oh my gosh, you come to a conclusion that they weren't parented well, or you come to the conclusion that they're not people you want to be around, or maybe you come to the conclusion that they live with a mental illness. But this isn't that everyone who manages a mental illness has these issues, but it helps you understand a little bit when you're an employer, because 1 in 5 adults, they're working, 1 in 5 children, they're going to school. And so it's good to know that these are some things that could be affected. And so how do we help people be the best that they can be in school, in work? Because it's us, right? 1 in 5, it's us. Now, I'm going to stop because I have 2 guest speakers, and I'm going to go on with a little more information. I will do this slide, but then I'm going to go on with more information about resources that NAMI can offer. But person-first language is pretty important, and I've been modeling it, but I need to call it out a little bit. So I said I was born to a mother who lived with mental illness. My mom died at 82. She was diagnosed in college. She had a break from reality, which is what psychosis is. She had a break from reality, was hospitalized. Then she went back to college at the University of Minnesota. And by the way, the year was 1939. So just know that there are 3 ways to really use person-first language. You can say someone lives with bipolar disorder, or they live with a mental illness. Somebody experiences schizophrenia or lives with, schizophrenia. Somebody manages. And I use it for diabetes too. People are not diabetic. We don't call people illnesses. You manage diabetes, you live with diabetes, you experience it. And it's hard to get used to using new words. For example, I wasn't used to doing my pronouns 2 years ago. So now I try, before I speak to say, these are my pronouns. It's something that you can acquire as a habit. And so same thing with this, lives with, manages, experience. Because when you use pejorative terms like crazy, nuts, cuckoo, or you call people illnesses, why would someone seek help if they're going to be name called? And it's dehumanizing. It is dehumanizing to call people retarded. I haven't heard that since, I don't know, second grade on the playground. Because in developmental disabilities, they say somebody lives with Down syndrome. So just words matter, because we want people to get help, because there's stigma and discrimination. And, we also kind of want to avoid those words like suffering, because it's okay for emphasis to use suffering from time to time. Like my sister, this is true. My sister, who lives with severe bipolar disorder, she's been hospitalized, not for her mental health, but she's been hospitalized 4 times since January. She had COVID. She was boosted. She had COVID in the hospital. And she also then had some gastrointestinal issues. And then she had a psychiatrist that gave her a toxic dose of one of her medications. So 4 hospitalizations of 5 days or more since January. I would say my sister's been suffering, right? But when you say suffering, every time you talk about mental illness, it sounds like there's no hope, and there is hope, a lot of hope. People get better. People are us. So that's probably my last thing on person first. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. And I have to say, I've been talking, so I haven't been paying attention. Is Bob also on yet? Jay, have you noticed if Bob's on? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Oh, I see you now. Hi, Bob. Hi, Renee. Now, I'm going to have Bob go first, because Bob is a volunteer for us, and the person is busy. I think you find a volunteer, and they're the ones that, fill all the jobs. So, Bob, if you would go first, and then Renee will go after that.
Thank you, Kay, and thank you so much for letting me be with you this afternoon. This is a great opportunity, and the discussion so far, it looks like it's been very helpful. So, my name's Bob Swanson. I'm a suicide loss survivor. Our oldest son, Michael, died by suicide at the age of 33 on March 13th, 2009. I happen to have worked in the construction industry for 45 years. We have 4 adult children, 10 grandchildren, and my wife and I are coming up in December on 53 years of marriage. So if you had looked at us at any time through Michael's life, you'd say we're just an average American family. Part of some of the things Kay talked about, and I will also talk about, because of the shame and the stigma around mental illness, our friends did not know that Michael was having a journey, and we were having a journey with him. His siblings obviously knew. My mother knew. I did not tell my dad until late, just because I knew he wouldn't understand. So think of any illness, the burden that has when you can't share it. And I'll talk a little bit about that through our journey. So a few minutes I have. Michael was our second child, delightful. People loved him growing up, preschool, grade school. He was like a magnet in the neighborhood. He was a magnet. He had that energy. He had that curiosity, charisma, intelligent, athletic. And I know I'm sounding a little much like, my goodness, but that's who he was. His friends just gathered around him. We had people at the house all the time. Sometimes it was, overwhelming, but it was also fun to have a house full of energy and a house full of kids. Some of what I'm going to tell you, I'm looking back in hindsight, because at the time I didn't understand it. Michael didn't understand it. Looking back, I'm thinking about 14, 15 years old, somewhere in there, which is what, 8th, 9th grade. He started changing. His energy level was much reduced. Anger. Some of it we thought, well, it's just being a normal teenager. Well, of course, it was more than that. But it was hard to get him motivated. He lost some of that energy, a curiosity, wasn't being out with his friends, was more to himself. So at some point in that period of time, we got a doctor, said, something's not quite right with our son. We're concerned. He was misdiagnosed with clinical depression. I now know that a misdiagnosis of adolescence can be fairly common because our brains don't fully develop until our mid to late 20s. And in his case, it was a misdiagnosis. So in high school, one of the things, again, looking to hindsight, that kept Michael really going was baseball. He loved baseball, studied baseball. He was captain of his high school baseball team. He was a catcher. He was in the action. So we really had two personalities on the baseball field. Boy, he was that old Michael. Just everybody gathered around him, and he was giving hints, and he was mentoring, and he had that energy, and the coach was using him as captain to keep the team all together. And he'd come home and he'd just withdraw, go back in his room and just be grumpy. And it was like, what the heck? Enrolled at Augsburg College. First semester, got what we thought he would. Almost, straight A's, was doing well. Second semester, it was actually about this time of year. It was shortly before the end of the semester, I got a call from the dean of students, which was, like, you're hoping, oh, your son's doing great. He says, I have some bad news for you, Mr. Swanson. Your son is not attending class. He's not doing well. He's failing his courses or getting incompletes. And we're not sure he should continue his career at Augsburg without some major changes. My first reaction, I was angry, and I had no idea what was really going on. Of course, I now know Michael, one of his illnesses was seasonal affective disorder, which is called SADS. In our climate, lack of sunlight in the winter months gets our serotonin going. He just couldn't get going. Again, these illnesses, it's not nobody's fault. And it's easy to blame the person. I accepted a lot of guilt, like it was my fault. Believe it or not, Michael was ashamed of his illnesses. We were ashamed, and that's why we kept it to ourselves. Plus, partly we didn't know what to do about it. During that period of time, I want to say high school, college, we became familiar with NAMI, and I'm glad we did. It was a great experience. We took a course that Kay will talk about called Family to Family. My wife, one of our daughters, and myself attended. And we learned about Michael's illnesses. We learned about the medications, the side effects. But here's what we really learned. We weren't alone. We weren't the only ones having loved ones living with these illnesses. But up to that point, loneliness, and then you had an environment where you could talk about, geez, I feel like I'm ashamed, it's my fault. And of course, others felt the same way. And you say, oh goodness, I'm not looking at this wrong. I have these feelings and they're legitimate. So then at age 23, through the 20s, Michael's 20s, very chaotic. And again, I didn't understand what was going on, nor did he. He was assaulted at age 23, suffered a skull fracture, was in a coma for 3 days. We now know, of course, a major head wound can affect our brains, and I think it affected Michael's brain. Throughout his 20s, in and out of jobs, in and out of school, in and out of relationships. Again, I regret, I'd get angry, I'd get upset and say, what's your problem? Well, of course, his problem was he wasn't well. Age 29, he made an attempt on his life. And at that point, he was diagnosed that he was living with bipolar disorder. So now, as Kay said, 10 years. Well, now after almost 15 years, we finally find out his real illness. So up to this point, he was medicated improperly, receiving the wrong therapies. And you can imagine the frustration he had. And then, of course, 4 years later, he died by suicide. So a couple things I want to just leave you with. One, there's no shame to these illnesses. We have to talk about them as illnesses. They're illnesses of the brain. They are treatable. And yet, until we can talk about this openly, the shame kept our family from really getting probably the care Michael should have had, and it keeps others. So we need to have atmospheres like this where we can talk about it. Secondly, I would say terminology is huge. Kay mentioned one thing, that's, people live with these illnesses. But another one I would say is how we typically talk about suicide. And it took me a long time to accept the new terminology. So I'll do the same that Kay did. Try it out for a while. We typically say a person commits suicide. Our son did not want to die. He wanted his pain to end. His illnesses clouded his brain and gave him really no hope. His illness caused his death, no different than pancreatic cancer caused my mother's death. They're both horrible illnesses, and they both, in both cases, the illness led to their death. My mother didn't want to die, nor did our son. And it's my opinion that when we say they commit suicide, we're blaming them. We're blaming their family. Like something was wrong with the Swanson family. My God, their son died by suicide. The only thing was wrong, we had a son living with an illness that led to his death. And I think that just changes the whole dynamics. We don't blame the person, we blame the illness. So I would encourage you to try that out. Lastly, I'd like to leave you with, I keep it with me all the time, NAMI's principles of support. And I think all groups, we all need to have this feeling that when we're in those lonely moments that, number one, there's an organization that we believe in and that we can trust. And secondly, there's some support principles that we can rely on. So I'm just going to read these quickly. We will see the individual first and not the illness. We recognize mental illnesses are medical illnesses. We aim for better coping skills. We find strength in sharing experiences. We reject stigma in ourselves and others. We won't judge anyone's pain as less than our own. We forgive ourselves and reject guilt. That one took me quite a while, and part of my story is probably the first 4 or 5 years after Michael's death, I had a lot of guilt. I blame myself as a dad, as a father. Why couldn't I have helped my son? Why couldn't I have prevented this? And through my faith, I realized that it's not going to do any good for me to be angry the rest of my life and be hung up on the guilt and the blame. And through the help of others, and I'll give Kay a lot of credit, she approached my wife and said, do you think Bob might want to talk about your journey? And I'm glad I said yes. And I retired 7 years ago. And the main reason I retired wasn't because I didn't love the industry I was in, but I had to do what I'm now doing. And I speak as a volunteer for NAMI, and I also volunteer to speak to construction companies around the country. Unfortunately, the construction industry has the highest suicide rate of any other industry. And our suicide rate's about 3 to 4 times that of the general population. So this is part of my healing. I got off track, sorry. The rest of them, we embrace humor as healthy. We accept we cannot resolve all problems. Boy, that's a big one for me. We expect a better future in a realistic way. And last, we will never give up hope. So thank you for letting me be with you today.
Thanks so much, Bob. So Bob is moving on to another volunteer assignment. But I know if you have a comment or a question right now, Bob probably has a minute or two. So any comments or questions for Bob before he heads out?
I can stay on for a couple minutes, okay.
Okay. Anyone able to say anything now if you wish? Okay. Thank you, Bob. Really appreciate it. And my next, I have a great pleasure of introducing Renee to you. She'll tell her story, but in addition to telling a personal story, she also is in charge of one of the programs I talked briefly about, I think, which is Ending the Silence. So if you don't mind, Renee, also, when you're done, to talk a little bit about some of the children's programs, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so my name's Renee. I'm 29 years old. I'm from Inver Grove Heights, Minnesota originally. I love doing just about everything outside. Now that the weather is warmer, I'm always going for walks. I love hiking. I love exploring new places. Pre-COVID, I also really love to travel. I've lived in 3 countries outside of the US, and I've traveled to 7. And some of my greatest accomplishments in life are that I've gone skydiving, I've danced with Bill Nye the Science Guy, and I've hugged an astronaut. And so growing up, people would have always described me as this very happy child. I was very confident and outgoing. I loved spending time with my friends. And I also wanted to be a friend to everyone. But then somewhere around middle or high school, something changed. I wasn't quite so confident anymore. I no longer felt particularly outgoing. I was starting to withdraw. I didn't want to spend as much time with my friends. But the big change I noticed was I could never quite feel happy. It was like there was sort of this dark cloud over everything I did. And even if something really great happened, something to make me glad or excited, there would always be this shadow over it. So I could never fully celebrate those emotions. And so there was never actually a major trauma that brought any of this on, but it still seemed like no matter how good life was, I always felt kind of glum. And if I didn't feel that way, I'd hit these terrible lows where I just hated myself and felt worthless and like I couldn't do anything right. And so I described myself at this time as smiling on the outside while falling apart on the inside. I always felt like I needed to smile. My friends came from pretty difficult home lives, and I came from a very stable home. So I always felt like, whatever I was going through, my friends were going through worse. So I had to smile and stay positive and stay strong for them. But deep down inside, I always felt like I was falling apart, like I was just barely holding on by a thread, just barely getting through each day. And either I would be so overwhelmed with emotions that I was constantly holding back tears, or I just didn't feel anything at all. And so fast forward, I went through middle school, high school like this. I went to college, and things were much better in college. I would say college is just overall a healthier environment than high school. But even with that, I was still smiling on the outside while falling apart on the inside. And we had talked a little bit about mental illnesses in health class, not a whole lot, but a little bit. And I kind of suspected I might have one, but it just seemed like none of the mental illnesses we learned about seemed to fit me. It seemed like my really severe symptoms, like hating myself and feeling worthless, weren't quite long lasting enough to qualify for any of the mental illnesses we had learned about. But my really long lasting symptoms, like feeling kind of glum, feeling a little empty, feeling kind of gray, just didn't seem quite severe enough to be any of the mental illnesses we had learned about. And so I went really undetected by myself. I also went undetected by my teachers. A very common warning sign of mental illness is if your grades start slipping. But in my case, I always got really good grades because to me, getting an A was a form of validation. It was my teachers telling me good job. And since I couldn't find happiness from within, I would desperately seek it from without and tell myself, if I get one more A, if I do well on this test, if I get a good job on this essay, then I can be worth something. And then I can be happy. But that didn't really work out. And so fast forward a year later, 4 years later, I finished up college. And then I went on to go serve for a year in Argentina as a volunteer. And, I always say, if you ever get the opportunity to serve abroad or study abroad, highly recommend it. Amazing experience. And I had a really good experience too, but it was also really isolating. I was living by myself for the first time ever. When I was in college, I had 5 roommates my senior year, and I absolutely loved that. And so going from that to living by myself in a foreign country where I had no family, no friends, I hardly knew anybody, that was so lonely. And I spent so many nights just in my house by myself with nothing but my own thoughts. And that just really wasn't healthy. And so a year later, I came back to the United States, and I was still, smiling on the outside while falling apart on the inside. But this time I no longer had the things that had been holding me together. My friends were all fighting, so I couldn't turn to them for support. I was no longer in school, so I wasn't getting those good grades, those good jobs from my teachers that kept me going. Well, at the same time, I had just started a job as a teacher, and it really wasn't going well. Well, at the same time, I was still dealing with that isolation from Argentina, but I didn't feel like I could tell anyone about it, because everyone always asked me how amazing my experience was, if it was the best experience ever. And it was, but it was hard. And it was lonely. And I didn't think anyone wanted to hear about that. While at the same time, I was really struggling as a teacher. I could barely get through a class. I could not manage my students' behaviors. While at the same time, I was also going through this thing called reverse culture shock, which is where you live in another country for a while and you feel kind of out of place because you're not quite in your own culture, you're not quite in your own home. And then you come home again and you're like, yes, I'm going to fit in, I'm in my own culture. And you don't, because it turns out you changed a lot while you were gone. And so I felt out of place in my own country. While at the same time, I felt like I was letting everyone down. Everyone thought I was going to be the most amazing teacher ever, but I wasn't. I was struggling. While at the same time, I had lessons to plan and papers to grade and people to please until finally I couldn't do it. I fell apart. I had to quit my job. I couldn't handle that stress, and I really felt like a failure. And so this was probably one of the lowest points in my life, but this was also probably one of the best things that could have happened to me, because I finally reached a point where I could no longer do it alone. I'd always been able to just barely hold on by that thread to just barely get through the day, but that thread had been cut, which meant I finally reached a point where I had no other option but to get help. And so I started seeing a therapist, and I got diagnosed with dysthymia with occasional episodes of major depression. And dysthymia is kind of this brand of depression we don't really talk about, where it's like, it's not storming, but it's always raining. And so this explained why I could never seem to find a mental illness that fit me, because in health class, we only ever talked about major depression, which is where you hit these really bad lows for a really long time and you come back up again. And then you hit these really bad lows for a really long time and you come back up again. And with dysthymia, you're not hitting those bad lows like you get in major depression, but you also don't get to come back up again. You're just kind of stuck in a constant state of gray. And so it's been a long road to recovery, and admittedly, I'm still on it. But I think having that diagnosis really helped. It helped kind of put words to what I was feeling, explain what was going on. And for a diagnosis to exist, that meant other people had to be going through this too. I wasn't alone. And so I remember when I quit my job, I just wanted to hide. I felt so ashamed. I didn't want to tell anyone what happened. But I decided I had to tell at least one friend. So I told someone in Argentina, because at least then he'd be really far away if he was going to judge me. And what he told me was this: you need to start talking to your friends. They love you and care about you, and they're going to understand. And he was right. I was so scared when I started talking to my friends that they would just judge me and say things like, I can't believe you quit, or why didn't you just tough it out, or you only lasted a month. But instead, all they said was, I'm sorry that happened to you. And they ended up being a huge part of my recovery. They would invite me to go get milkshakes or go to soccer games. They would text me to check in. They really encouraged me in talking about my depression and seeing a therapist. And overall, they were just really there for me. What's also really helped a lot in recovery was just learning how to talk about my feelings. Part of what made depression so overwhelming to me was that I always bottled everything up. And part of that was I didn't quite know how to explain what was going on. And another part was I just didn't think I could. I didn't think it mattered enough to be able to burden people with my negative feelings, or that I even deserved to have someone care about me. And so learning how to talk about my feelings was not only a healthy way of expressing myself, but also a way of validating myself and being able to say, you know what, I matter and I deserve to be heard. What's also really helped is just learning how to own having a mental illness. Like, there's nothing wrong with the fact that I have depression. It's totally fine that I have a mental illness. What I've learned from going abroad is what seems so important, like the best thing we should all strive to be. It's completely cultural. Society made it up, and it might seem so important that we act or be a certain way in one country, and you go somewhere else and it won't matter at all. And that's the same with personality types. We happen to live in a culture that really values very positive, outgoing, confident personalities. And these are all very beautiful and wonderful traits to have. And I really admire people that have them. But just because I don't have these traits doesn't mean I'm not beautiful and wonderful as well. Depression has made it harder for me to be as confident or to be as outgoing as I'd like to be. But it's also helped me to be more kind, more empathetic, more supportive. And those are really good traits to have too. So if there's one big thing I got from this whole experience, it was just to talk about how I was feeling. You know, having depression didn't mean anything was wrong with me. Needing help didn't make me weak. We're social creatures. We're never meant to do anything alone. And what's made humans so successful is that we work together. I've worked on teams to put on plays, do group projects, play sports, and I always thought these teams made me stronger. So shouldn't being on a team for my emotions make me stronger as well? And so, like I said, I'm still on that road to recovery. I can still get a gray cloud over my head sometimes, and I can still get really depressed sometimes. But the difference is that I no longer feel like I'm falling apart. I have sort of this inner peace. And a lot of that is learning how to understand this part of myself and also being able to accept this part of myself. And also knowing I don't need to be quiet anymore. And so it's been an amazing journey so far, learning about this piece of me, learning about myself. And I'm really excited for the journey that's to come. And I'm glad I got to share a piece of it with you today. Thank you. Oh, you're on mute, Kay.
I am. I'm just smiling because, you know, we're speaking to many attorneys, not all, and you look like you're in a prison cell, and then you have a visitor badge on, Renee. So it looks like you're a visitor in prison. Just saying.
Well, I'm a visitor at a high school, so basically the same thing.
Which is a good segue because Renee actually works for NAMI. I'm lucky to have her as a colleague. So could you talk a little bit about children's programming since we're going to talk about resources now?
Yeah, so I run the children's team programs. The main class we do for the children's team is Ending the Silence. So this is a class for high school students where we talk about mental health, mental illness, suicide prevention, where to get help, and of course, how to end that silence around mental illness. It ends with the young adult speaker telling their stories, so something similar to mine. And so that one's really popular. We've seen over 8,000 students this year, so we've been getting our numbers quite well, been all over the metro area and then some. We just started doing a middle school version of that class where it's a lot of the same content, but we have more games and it's a little more interactive to make it a little more developmentally appropriate for middle school. And then we also have a class called Anxiety, Stress, and Coping, which is a class for middle and high school students where we talk about where anxiety and stress come from, healthy and unhealthy ways to cope with it, and what anxiety disorders are. And then we have lots of programs also for parents and for teachers as well. And right now, because it's Mental Health Awareness Month, what we're doing is we're going to different schools and we're setting up shoe day booths. And so the idea is kids come to our booth in the cafeteria and they write words of encouragement to kids living with mental illness on these little shoe cards. And we tape them up on our banner so kids with mental illness know they're not alone. The idea behind the shoes is walk a mile in my shoes. And so that's why I'm at a high school right now. I just finished that up and they let me stay here so I didn't have to drive all the way home. And so hence the prison cell looking room in the library. But yeah, and so those are our main programs. We get to do a lot during the school year. It's a lot of fun.
Well, any comments or questions? Bob did need to leave and he was thrilled to have your thank yous. Anything that you want to ask Renee before we talk about fishing?
Someone wrote in the Q&A just to repeat my diagnosis, and so that's called dysthymia. And then I also have occasional episodes of major depression as well as seasonal affective disorder, but dysthymia is kind of my main diagnosis.
Anything else, Nikki, that you see? And yeah,
again, like with Bob, I'm seeing a lot of thank yous. Everybody really appreciates the shared experience. So thank you, Renee, for doing that.
Yeah. See you soon, Renee. Thank you. Now about these are NAMI Minnesota booklets, and I'm just going to show you an example of a couple of them on screen. But if you go to our NAMI Minnesota website, you actually can read these as PDFs. You don't have to have the hard copy of the book. So we have a booklet on understanding psychosis. Now, psychosis is not a mental illness, it's a symptom. You can have psychosis, a break from reality, with schizophrenia. Most people with schizophrenia have a break from reality. You can have psychosis with bipolar disorder. Not everyone with bipolar disorder does, but you could. You can have, with substance use disorder, you can have psychosis, a break from reality with substance use disorder. So this booklet gives you some basics about psychosis, including talking about the first episode psychosis program. So the first time someone has a break from reality, you're usually under 24 if you're going to have one. And it's really important to get connected to a first episode psychosis program. Now, in Minnesota, we didn't start first episode psychosis programs. We were late to the party. But I want you to know that we have 4 of them. So there's 2 at the University of Minnesota. There's 1 at HCMC, Hennepin Healthcare, and there's 1 program in Duluth. And so it's important, if possible, if someone young in your life has a first break from reality, it's important to get them into a first episode psychosis program. So this booklet talks a little bit about the first episode psychosis programs, tells you a little bit about what psychosis is. We also have a booklet on co-occurring disorders. So you can live with substance use disorder and a mental illness at the same time. And again, the first line of treatment is typically having someone who does integrated dual diagnosis treatments. So you want to find a practitioner who understands substance use disorder and mental illness. And they used to be siloed, you know, but more and more practitioners now are trained in both. And by the way, you know, I would call this co-occurring also, but usually when they use that terminology, it's substance abuse and mental illness. But you can also have 3 mental illnesses and you can have other health conditions. You know, I work with aging populations, so you could have bipolar disorder that you've had since you've been 17. You could have also an eating disorder. You could also have macular degeneration, diabetes, obesity, and Parkinson's, right? So you tend to age with your illnesses. And so it's important, you know, to have a practitioner that can work with complex situations. And in mental health, it's important to have someone who can treat both substance use disorder and mental illness concurrently. We also have a booklet on Hope for Recovery, it's called. So Hope for Recovery is the basics of adult mental health systems in Minnesota. And every state's different. So if you move to another state, their mental health system is not the same as ours. It's not one-stop shopping any place. But, you know, here in Minnesota, we actually provide our services through the county. That's not true. Other states might do it through the state. So if you have family members that live in another state and you're trying to help them from afar, you sort of have to learn the mental health system where your family member lives. And NAMI chapters in those states, you know, can be helpful as well. So just want you to know about these booklets. You can read them as PDFs. We have about 12 of them on different topics, so they can be helpful. And we also do fact sheets. And so if you want to learn some basics about a mental illness, you can actually go to NAMI Minnesota's website and look at our fact sheets. You know, you can read a 2-pager on borderline personality disorder or a 2-pager on major depression. Our national NAMI office has fact sheets too, similar, but they might have a little more information. There's books out there. You know, I can't talk about all the books today, but I have one that has a particularly catchy title. I'm reaching for my books. You know, these home offices are not, you know, all they're cracked up to be. This one's called, I Am Not Sick, I Don't Need Help. Now, sometimes people who have symptoms have lack of insight, and lack of insight is a symptom. And so they don't think they need help. They maybe have tried getting help, didn't like it, was stigmatizing, and so they may have stopped their help. And you're trying desperately as their friend or their family or their coworker to encourage them to get the help they need. And so I Am Not Sick, I Don't Need Help. I like the book because it has really good communication strategies. So when someone who has a break from reality says, you know, there are cameras in these light fixtures and they're tracking my every move, or the FBI has implanted a chip in my brain, what am I going to do? Unscrew the light bulb and say, look, there's no camera up there? Or am I going to argue with them and say, no, there's no chip in your brain. Where are the stitches? You know, so my point is, you know, take a communication strategy class from us, because it doesn't work to say, yes, there is, no, there's not, yes, no, yes, no. Instead, you say things like, you know, Mary, you must be scared, so scared to think that there's a camera in the light fixture tracking you. You notice I didn't agree. I just said you must be very scared. So it's really important to go with the feeling, to be empathetic, and to listen. So now I'm going to move on. There's many more education things. You have to look at our website, but I'm going to go on to support, because that's another part of our 3-legged stool. And support, we have a helpline, and it's not a crisis line. It's a helpline during business hours. And I took a call, and it's a good demonstration of how complicated our calls. I took this call about 3 years ago. I don't run the helpline, but we all help out. So the call was a dad from Dakota County. Son's in the jail. He's been there over 60 days, and he lives with schizophrenia. And so the dad said, he had to describe his son. He said, my son called me this week. He's getting discharged, and he can't live with us. And he explained why. He can't live with us. He doesn't have a job. He hasn't received his medication for schizophrenia for more than 60 days, right? And he doesn't have health insurance. That is a very complicated phone call. And, you know, I said to the dad, what do you want to tackle first? And he said, well, I guess housing, because he's getting out this week. We don't even know which day, and he can't live with us. So we don't have housing at NAMI, but I explained, you know, this is the number you call. And if it's immediate housing you need, you know, you're going to be sent through a phone tree. That doesn't mean that there's going to be any beds. Doesn't mean there's going to be any mat on the floor. It just means that's where you start. So that was the first thing. And then, you know, we're already 20 minutes into the conversation because he had to explain all this to me. And then I said, what do you want to tackle next? And he said, well, I guess medication. You know, as you know, you don't get to bring a bag of meds to the jail and say, these are my son's medications, you know. And so a health provider has to see you while you're in jail. And that doesn't happen always. And so in this case, it didn't. And so he needed emergency medication or to see someone. And then for emergency, and then after that, you know, he could get set up perhaps with a provider. So that's all we got through. The dad said, I have to get to work. And so I said, well, check back with us if you want to tackle some of the other issues. So our helpline people try to get back to people within 48 hours, business hours, and we're resources. That's all we are. You know, we don't give unsolicited advice, and we're not healthcare practitioners. There's also a warm line at Mental Health Minnesota, because during these times, particularly during COVID, sometimes people just need to talk. And Mental Health Minnesota has a warm line. It's 6 days a week, so you can refer people there, and they're going to be talking to peers. There's no advice given. It's just really to listen, because people are lonely, people are isolated, people are struggling, and they were struggling, isolated and lonely even before COVID, but certainly COVID has aggravated this, as have Ukraine, as have inflation, as have racial injustices that were a tipping point at Mr. Floyd's murder. So there's lots of things going on for people. Okay, now the other support that we have is, besides our helpline, is that we do also try to tell people about peer support specialists. And that is for someone who's in recovery from mental illness. They can go to the Department of Human Services and apply to be a peer support specialist. And if they're selected, it's a 2-week training program. And there are people with lived experience that once they're trained and certified, they can work and be hired by counties. They can work and be hired by direct service providers of mental health services. So I know a church that St. Joan of Arc and Bethlehem Lutheran in South Minneapolis, at one time they shared a peer support specialist, even though they're different denominations, so that their members of their faith communities could actually have someone walk in tandem with them as they're managing mental health concerns. And they're called peer support specialists. So we try to direct people to that program because it also is a good place to start your work career again. You know, maybe you've been struggling with mental illness, now you're doing well. And so being a peer support specialist is meant to be a paid job. But you do have to have the credentials for that. We also have support groups. We have family support groups, and we have support groups for people who live with mental illness. So if you go to our website, you'll see them listed. Most are online, but some are in person. And we have a couple specialized ones. The 2 big categories are people who live with mental illness, those support groups, and then people who are family members. But within family support groups, we have one that's just for spouses and partners. So you have a spouse or a partner that manages an illness, and you go to a support group with other spouses and partners that also have a family member. We also have a couple specific support groups called Open Door, and they actually are for anxiety disorder only. So you can go to a regular all illness support group, or you can go to one if you live with anxiety disorders. And Open Door, they use a book as kind of a workbook, and it's called Embracing the Fear. And it's really a good book. I don't live with anxiety disorders, but I've read it, very practical. And they use that kind of as a workbook in the support group. They also, since they're online, you can be anywhere, that's a positive thing about COVID. But again, if you prefer in person, you can sort through the list and see if there's some in person. They're run by peers. So family members lead the family support groups, we train them, and people who live with a mental illness in recovery are trained by us to lead the peer support groups for people who live with mental illness. So 3 years ago, we helped pass legislation so that people that are teachers would need to have some suicide prevention training. And we teach a number of suicide prevention classes. We have a good beginning class for anybody 16 and older, which is called QPR. Teachers can take it, but the general public, 16 and older, can take Question, Persuade, Refer. It's for everybody, 16 and older. I teach a class called Safe Talk. It's a basic class also, but it's 3.5 hours. I teach a class called Calm, which is for healthcare professionals. So you learn how to restrict the means, because firearms are the primary means that people in the United States use to attempt and die by suicide. And it's almost always fatal. So we need to restrict the means to keep the person safe and get them the help that they need. As a first aider, I teach those. So know that you can look at our website for suicide prevention classes, but we also did advocacy to require, in this case, teachers to have those 2 types of education. We also care about having a mental health in the community because, our belief is that, our mental health system isn't broken. It was never built. It's not broken, never built. So NAMI's been in existence 43 years. And in these years, we started because we closed the mental health units, the mental health hospitals in Hastings and in Fergus Falls. We still have one. We still have St. Peter. My mom and sister were both hospitalized in St. Peter for acute care. They aren't used for that anymore. But institutions are not the way to deliver mental health services. They're best delivered in the community. So, we closed these institutions all these years ago, more than 40 years ago, but we never had the community-based services to take up the slack. And here we are today, we still don't have enough. And so we spent a lot of time at the legislature also trying to get funding for things. So school-based mental health services are another thing. We want kids to be able to see the help they need in the school rather than having a parent take off from work, pick up the child at school, drive an hour and a half in greater Minnesota, see a therapist, and then repeat all that going back. School's going to be over for the day, and your job, you would have had to take off time for that. So we wanted a counselor to be in the school so that the kids can come out of the classroom, and one day a week, maybe they're in War Road, Minnesota, another day of the week, they're in another town, and the kids come to the counselor who's already in the school for that day. So the other thing is that competency restoration, we've been working really hard on that topic during this legislative session, and it looks like it's going to pass all the parts of it. So that's good. And then we'll take a 10-minute break, and I'm going to talk about handling difficult callers. And the only reason I want to bring this up is that there are crisis numbers that you should put in your phone, and I'll talk about those another time. But I want to be sure that you can take a photo of this slide, with your camera if you want. But if you don't have these numbers in your phone, it would be important to have them. And I'll try to talk maybe about it with difficult callers. I'll try to mention this, but these are the numbers you want to have in your phone. So take a photo with your camera. I'll see you in 10 minutes, which will be about 3:40. And
welcome back, everyone. We hope you had a good break. I'm going to let Kay take over with the second part of today's webinar, Dealing with Difficult Callers.
Thanks so much, Nikki. And same, you can certainly put comments or questions in the chat. I'll try to stop from time to time. And for this program, we're just together an hour and won't be able to cover everything, but hopefully you'll get some ideas that you can use in your work. And I just want to remind, because I know maybe there'll be a couple new people. NAMI Minnesota is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We're the state office, and I've been with NAMI 13 years. I'm a family member and worked in corporate America before NAMI. And just want you to know that our NAMI Minnesota website really has good resources. So use that to refer people, as a resource when you're talking to them. And we have programming for all ages. We have a children's team that works with parents and youth themselves through the school programs. And we work with professionals that work in healthcare. So we do have a wide range of programming. And we also are good with resources. And so we do have a helpline, and it's during business hours. And so that can be a resource as well. Here's my email address, and you're welcome to reach out to me. If I'm not the right person, I'll put you in touch with one of my colleagues. And so if you're joining us by phone, it's my initial K and then King at NAMIMN.org. So KKING at NAMI, NAMIMN.org. We're located in St. Paul, but primarily working remotely. And please take advantage of using us for presentations and classes for other areas of your life. And you can fill out a request form, on the NAMI Minnesota website. We're going to talk a little bit about mental illness. Since many people were with us on Get to Know NAMI, I won't spend as much time. I'll highlight a couple more items. And, just really knowing that COVID has really been a catastrophic stressor. And I'll talk a little bit about, what causes mental illness in these understanding mental illness basics. And then also the steps that you can take to successfully engage with difficult callers. So before we learn, about difficult callers, let's just take some basic information again. So, mental health, we're all born with some aspects of health, hopefully good health, but some people are born with struggles right away. But our health, it's a state of well-being where people can use their own skills and strategies, or friends and family, or supportive people at work to kind of handle those normal stresses of life. And, we want everyone to have purpose, and that purpose might be raising kids or volunteering or work, paid work, which is what most people aspire to. But we want people to be their best selves. And if you're in a for-profit business, you want to make a profit. If you're in a business like I am, nonprofit, we want to be able to fulfill our mission and be able to help the people that we serve. But when you have a mental illness, that really can disrupt many things, and includes really the most basic daily skills when your acute symptoms are taking place. Most people don't live with a high level of mental illness symptoms all the time. People have periods of stability. So one thing I didn't talk about in the last program was what causes mental illness. So I'm just going to tell you the answer is we don't know. Don't you love that? We don't know. But there is a theory, and I'm going to tell you what the theory is. The theory is you're born with a predisposition and something puts it in motion. And what puts it in motion is considered a second hit. So genetics can play a role. There are some mental illnesses that have a little higher genetic component, and one of those is bipolar disorder, which I mentioned to you is an illness in my family. So, but it's not 50-50 even, it's less than that. And I want to just, and this is very simplistic because my biology was late 70s, is that if you had two identical twins, they share 100% of the same genes. So if one lived with a mental illness, wouldn't it stand to reason that the second identical twin would also, if it was just a genetic issue? I simplified that way, way too much. But I want you to know that we don't know, but probably we're going to learn someday that mental illnesses are multifactorial, not just one cause. Now, if you believe the theory, you're born with a predisposition, something puts it in motion. Think about some of the things that could put it in motion. An environmental example could be what Bob talked about. He said that his son, Michael, lived with SAD disorder, seasonal affective disorder. That's a type of major depression. So we live in a latitude that receives less sunlight than if you lived in Texas or Mexico or Florida, right? So less sunlight puts you at greater risk for a type of major depression called SAD disorder. Not everybody in Minnesota develops SAD disorder. Just because you crave donuts and carbohydrates and you have a hard time getting up in the morning in the winter, that does not mean you have SAD disorder. It's a diagnosable illness and has criteria. So, but environmental, that could be a second hit, the fact that we live in a place that has less sunlight in parts of the year. You also could have trauma, and I think you know a lot about trauma. As a matter of fact, the people at Standpoint know more about trauma than I do. But trauma could be things like sexual assault. Trauma could be things like domestic violence. Trauma could be natural disasters. So I use Puerto Rico as an example. It's a territory of the United States. And in Puerto Rico, they had 5 years ago Hurricane Maria, devastating hurricane. They lost power to almost all of the island. Many people had no power for a year. It's the territory of the United States, right? They also have had an earthquake in the last 5 years. So those people who maybe got their power back lost it again. They also have had COVID on the island. And their tourism certainly has been affected, which is a large part of their money that is earned in Puerto Rico. So that's an example. So trauma could be a car accident. There are many things that are trauma. I think that racial inequities, they've always existed, but the tipping point for many of us was, Mr. Floyd's murder. So, and we still haven't figured this out. I live in the city of Minneapolis, 2 miles from where Mr. Floyd was killed. And I have to say that, we still haven't worked out city of Minneapolis issues that relate to policing, that relate to public safety, et cetera. And it weighs heavily because I'm a privileged white middle-class woman, and I don't quite know where I fit yet. I've spent a lot of time educating myself, but this is weighing heavily on my mind. Contentious elections have weighed heavily on minds. People have lost some friendships, maybe temporarily, or they're estranged from family because of some of the contentious politics. And then COVID, then on top of all this COVID, and I don't know about you, but my pay didn't raise, and yet my gas is $1.50 more than it was a year ago. And that's just gas. Heat, light, and power is more, food is more, well, everything is more. Plane fare is more because, of course, I use fuel. So the other thing is that, there's not one solution when people do have mental health concerns. There's many things you have to do to get better. I wish it was just one simple thing, right? But it's not. And the last bullet point's really crucial. I just want you to go away today just knowing mental illnesses are treatable. I'm actually going to give you an older adult statistic because, I think people think, well, you're 65 plus or you're in your 80s, who wouldn't be depressed? In actuality, if an older adult, and I'm using 65 plus, boomers, I'm getting really close here, boomers do not like being called old, but the government has an age thing. So let's just say that 80% of older adults, 65 plus, that receive help for depression get better, 80%. So if you know a little bit about gambling odds, 80% is so much better than Mystic Lake. That's a very hopeful figure. So even someone who might be several years from end of life, right, they can get better with help. You aren't always cured, but you certainly can feel better. So you saw this in a little different context in my last information, but really mental illnesses affect all aspects of our life, but treatable. And it is biological in nature, has some brain chemistry components, brain structure components, and obviously historical trauma could also be that second hit. COVID is a catastrophic stressor. COVID has definitely been a second hit. For someone who's already managing a mental illness, COVID has not been kind. For someone who may have a predisposition, COVID has not been kind. Now, by the way, there's no test for a predisposition. The theory is you're born with a predisposition. There's no X-ray, there's no PET scan, there's no blood test, there's no urinalysis. Now, there is what appears to be a genetic component in Kay King's family. So I could see that because, I knew 3 generations of my family when I was young. And so my mom is one of 4. 3 of the 4 live with a mental illness. My grandma, my mom's mom, was one of 10, oldest of 10. 6 of them live with a mental illness. My sister, there's 2 of us. My sister lives with a mental illness. I don't. My sister has 2 children. One of them manages a mental illness, one doesn't. It's pretty easy for me to see that, but genetics is not the whole story. In my family, there seems to be part of the story. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about violent crimes. Again, most people with mental illness are victims. And, we talked about, some of the illnesses, but schizophrenia, again, if you work in criminal justice or in family violence, or you work in housing with services, or you work in a medical clinic, you're going to see more than 1% of the population that you see with schizophrenia. But in the general population, schizophrenia is not very common. Compare it to anxiety, which is the most common of the mental illnesses. Borderline personality disorder, you may have heard it, but just know if you need resources for that, I have some good resources, and I'm not going to spend today's time on that, but you can reach out to me by email or to our helpline, and we can give you some resources. That's a difficult illness, but it's one where family support's really helpful, but families need some education on it as well. Most days I feel like I'm on a yacht. I have a job. Right now, my sister is not ill. She was hospitalized a lot in the last 4 months, but I saw her yesterday, and my sister is doing okay. So I feel like I'm sort of on a yacht, right? And some days, and it could be in the same week, I feel like I'm in a canoe going up the Mississippi and I have no paddle. And so, each of us, even day to day, month to month, have really struggled, I think, with these last 2 years and counting. And put that on top of other struggles. We have always had the other struggles, such as raising a family as we're trying to work, having ill older parents, having younger kids, and being in the middle, trying to help both ends of the age spectrum. There's lots of things that are stressful. And commutes for some people prior to COVID, that was a hard thing if you add another 2 hours to a workday that's already 10 hours. But COVID itself and some of the stressors that we've had in this last couple of months, last couple of years. So depression and anxiety have increased. And those two illnesses, about 1 in 10, it's 1 in 5 for all illnesses in adults, but 1 in 10, now it's 1 in 4. This is just last couple of years. And the CDC, Center for Disease Control, has actually done some surveying during this time. And they're getting some of this from a survey they did really recently. And so 36% of US people have saying they're trouble sleeping. And, that can be a sign and symptom of depression, too much sleep or too little compared to your normal. And so 32% of US adults have been saying they're having some difficulty eating too much, eating too little, can go either way. Alcohol use has skyrocketed in Minnesota, and it's skyrocketed in the United States. And I'm really no goody two-shoes, but I do want you to know that there are no mental health issues that are helped by alcohol. Sometimes, people use, if they're having some anxiety, and alcohol is a depressant, so they might initially get a little bit of relief, but quite quickly, even those people that live with anxiety, the alcohol makes the anxiety worse. And then, of course, you never want to become dependent on alcohol, because then you have a second illness. Not everybody becomes dependent. But alcohol just doesn't mix with mental health concerns. And then people who have some chronic conditions, an example might be Parkinson's disease. An example, might be a blood disorder that has some cancer ramifications. So things that are more chronic, that are under management, diabetes, 12% report a worsening of that. We don't know why this is, but gender-wise, people have reported more women than men have reported struggling during these last couple of years. We don't have enough research to know why that is. And suicide rates in the United States and we don't have figures yet that are firm for 2021, but in 2020 and 2019, for 20 years, suicide rates have gone up in the United States until we got to 2020. And that was one of the worst years. It was the beginning of COVID. So intuitively, I would think, well, that was a horrible year. Suicide rates are probably going to go up. In actuality, that was the first year in about 20 years that total suicide rates went down in the United States. First time. Hasn't been explained yet. Research hasn't been done. However, even though rates have gone down, among youth, they've gone up. So in that small age group, they've gone up. And in these surveys, younger adults are reporting more suicidal thoughts. Okay, so we care about all ages, but even within this broad decrease in suicides, we're seeing some that have increased, and young adults are one of them. Also, the opioid issue has been horrific. And you can see that there has been alcohol-related deaths increased over the previous 10 years. And, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid and often is mixed, with other things that are sold on the street, and you don't know what you're getting. And, fentanyl is very powerful. So there's been overdoses. They aren't necessarily mental health concerns. It could be someone who has used for the first time and they've taken a lethal dosage because they don't know what was in what they were sold. And if you already live with a mental illness, obviously, we want to try our hardest to come up with other strategies to use to feel better. And then people that have had COVID, they are reporting an increase in depression and anxiety. And I'm not just talking about long haul people, because that's kind of its own category, but people that have had serious enough to be out of work for a week, 2 weeks, or maybe hospitalized, but not being in the ICU. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I find it a little bit negative, but it's okay to put in the chat, and I'll just check with Nikki. It's okay to put in the chat a few of those words, and I'll start you out. Crazy would be an example, and just get them off your chest. Think of all those derogatory words, slang words that people use. Put a few in, and then let's tear up the flip chart paper and throw it away, Okay, let's hear a few of them and then we'll be done with it.
I've got wacky and insane that someone threw in. I can add to that nuts.
Yeah. And I have to say that, when you think about it, most people, if someone says, oh, it is such a crazy day at work, they're really not using it in reference to mental illness, but that's where it was derived from. And so, why would someone in their young 20s or their teens seek out help when they're going to be dehumanized with name calling? And really, stigma and discrimination are the main reason that people wait. So we really want to avoid that, even out of context. Like, it's a crazy day at work. I think it would be better to say it's an extremely busy day at work. Be more precise in your language. So here they are. We're done with it. Now, I'm going to ask you to do the same exercise, though. I'd like you to come up with some of those slang terms. You heard a few of them, and you very quickly saw a slide. Give me the same words. If you had a family member that lived with cancer, give me the crazy, nuts, cuckoo, psycho words that describe someone with cancer in your family.
Somebody threw out cripple.
Yep. So if somebody, had, let's say, an amputation of a leg or something like that, maybe we'd use that word. And that really is a dehumanizing term as well. But there aren't very many, like with cancer, I just really can't, think of anything for cancer. So I did try to think about this. I'm trying to shock you. So let's call someone in your family rotted flesh. Isn't that kind of comparable to crazy, nuts, cuckoo, psycho? Rotted flesh. Let's say someone has stage 4 skin cancer, which is very serious. You can die of that. Let's call your grandma rotted flesh. We wouldn't. Of course we wouldn't. So why is our brain talked about so differently than we talk about other illnesses? So we just need to be careful with language because we want people to get help. We don't want them to be dehumanized. So we've already talked about this, but just remember, I want you just to remember the 3 words: experience, live with, manage. That's more than 3 words, but 3 concepts: living with, experiencing, managing. I'd just like you to use that and use it for other illnesses too. Living with diabetes, managing diabetes, experiencing diabetes. When my mom died, and our family tombstone, I'm not going to write Doris King, bipolar. My mom's not an illness. My mom was a librarian in my hometown. She owned a restaurant with my dad, and they worked in it as well as financially shared ownership. My mom has 2 kids, so she was a mother. My mom was in theatrical performances. My mom was lots of things. She wouldn't have defined herself by bipolar. And, this is a former Minnesota governor. So his quote, and, he was governor more than 60 years ago. It's been a little more than 260 years since mentally ill and others were burned at the stake in Salem as witches. We discarded the stake, but retained our attitudes. And this was a long time ago when our former Minnesota governor said that, but it makes you realize how far have we come. You know, my earliest memories were visiting my mom in the St. Peter State Hospital. Le Sueur is right next to St. Peter. And it wasn't a great experience for a young child. And I visited much later because my sister was still there as recently as 20 years ago for acute care. It's not used for that anymore. And boy, it sure looked a lot like it did, you know, in the ensuing years. It looked like an institution. It still looked like an institution. So, you know, this is a quote from a long time ago. We wouldn't say mentally ill. We'd say someone living with mental illness. So now let's talk a little bit about callers, but I'm going to offer you the opportunity. Do you have any questions? This is very basic mental illness basics that we did now, as well as I did in the previous presentation. Does anybody have kind of a question about basic mental illness before we talk about this? Don't be shy.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat at the moment, Kay, but please feel free to type in your questions either into the chat or the Q&A. We'll get to them.
Okay, thanks. And you can take other classes. You know, you can take mental health first aid. It's an 8-hour class. You can, in a family-to-family class, if you're a family member, you'll learn quite a bit about mental illness. So there are other ways to learn this. And so don't be shy. I think, you know, again, I'm a family member. I had to learn on the job when I was little. But, you know, now there are classes and things that you can learn some basics. So try to take care of that. Now, you know, this isn't just difficult callers. It could be in person, but now with COVID, we've had to spend more time on the phone probably. And then some of your work, maybe even prior to COVID, I didn't ask Nikki this, maybe, you know, some of your helpline work has always been on the phone versus people having appointments in person. So these are just some pointers. Now, I came from the hospitality industry. I ran large hotels and resorts in Aruba, Richmond, Virginia, Dallas, Texas, Dayton, Ohio, Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. You know, I was in the hotel business. And I can't tell you, front desks are, you know, the hub of customer service. You know, you're a 24/7 operation, and, you know, you have people coming to your front desk or calling you on the phone that are in distress for many reasons. And so customer service is helpful to know these skills, even if you don't, you know, work directly in that. It's good even when you have family members that are struggling and maybe symptomatic and you need to talk. So the citation where this is from is on the bottom, but, you know, 67% of people say that they really have to make a fuss to get a problem resolved. And I don't know, we should probably poll, we're not going to, but we probably should poll us. I know that I've been on phone holds as long as 45 minutes, and that's on a call that I had to get through. You know, the IRS doesn't have enough staff, so good luck when you were doing your taxes if you had any question. I mean, you maybe went online, but you still, I mean, getting a hold of a person, a lot of older adults really can't navigate that well on their devices, and so they depend on the phones, and it's nearly impossible to get a real person. And then to get it resolved, you know, certainly 67% is not a figure I would be proud of when I worked for Marriott. We certainly would not want that kind of figure for customer service. And, you know, some of this gets moved on to you. So you're at the other receiving end. And so you have someone that's angry, and some of that, you know, unless you learn some self-care, that really gets absorbed by you as well. And can you imagine if that's your job and you're taking calls like that all day long, which sometimes call centers are, you can imagine just, you could take a real toll on your own mental health. And people using foul language, people being disrespectful, people being frustrated because we have call centers now that are in other countries, and English isn't always the first language of someone who's working in that call center. And, you know, lots of disrespect happening there as well. So I'm not saying you see all these things, but certainly, and I'll use you know, a front desk example from the hotel. In the hotel business, if you didn't know this, we try to have every room full. You know, if it's going to be a full night, sold out hotel, we're trying to exactly have every room full. To do that, overbooking happens because you have some fallout. When I was in the hotel business, my early part of my career, you did not have non-refundable deposits. And so we get cancellation same day. There might not always be someone who's going to take that spot. Depends how much demand there is. But I have to say, so we overbook, and the goal is to be at exactly 0. We don't want someone to be turned away. Now, in the hotel business, we call that walking. So if we have to turn someone away who has a reservation, we try to get a hold of them in advance, but sometimes you can't reach people. They're on planes or they're traveling. And so if I had a chance where there was someone who we had to move to another hotel, which we would pay for, and we'd transport them there, and we'd help them with anything they needed to move to another hotel, I wanted to be sure that I backed up my front desk employees and I would stay. Didn't happen too often, but let's say we had 2 rooms where we had, once a person got to the desk, we had to move them. It might be 10 o'clock at night. And so I had a business person that worked for a major Fortune 500 company. We couldn't reach that person in advance. And they came to the desk and they were furious. Now, we don't know their backstory. We don't know if their plane was delayed 3 times that day. We don't know if they have a business appointment that they missed at 5 o'clock because they couldn't get to the city. Now they are at our front desk and we're telling them you can't stay at our hotel. We're moving you to a very nice hotel, even maybe nicer than ours, but you can't stay here. And it's 10 o'clock at night and they're tired. I had, or my front desk person with me as backup, had a person so angry that they jumped over the front desk, which is almost chest height, jumped over the desk and came after us. And they were so angry. Now, we needed to be safe. So we went behind the desk, locked ourselves in the front office manager's office and called the police. But my point is, we don't know the backstory, right? So sometimes people are really angry. And this person was really angry. They were yelling. You wouldn't have initially been able to get in any conversation at all. And then very quickly, they jumped the desk. So that hasn't happened to me before prior to that, but we did have a plan that we could go into an office and lock the door. Sometimes people have delusions. And if you don't know what a delusion is, it's a false belief. So a delusion was me saying, for example, that someone tells you that there's a camera in the light fixtures that's tracking them, or they tell you that someone has put surveillance on their car. Now, I'm not saying those things couldn't be true, but in this case, they are delusions. They're false beliefs. And sometimes people are paranoid, and some people are just suspicious. It's not, I'm not trying to be funny at all, but I would say I've heard more about conspiracy theories. They've always been there, but I've heard more of them of late in the last 10 years than I had ever heard prior to that. So sometimes people are understandably suspicious. You can see where people would be suspicious because of how they've been really treated in the past. And skeptical might be another word. So your goal is to be able to help them, but to help them, you may have to do some de-escalation, and you need to really convey your empathy because you want to be able for it to be win-win. You want to have a satisfied caller. You want them to get the help that they need. And to do that, you need to somehow calm so that a conversation can be held. Or it can be postponed and held at a time when everybody, again, is able to communicate. And empathy is different than sympathy. Empathy, I think we all have heard the term, walk a mile in my shoes. And so obviously, empathy is in that person that jumped the desk. Immediately, I wasn't thinking empathy. But after I thought about it later, that person could have had all those things I proposed. They could have missed 2 flights. They could have missed a very important business appointment with their best customer. They could have already not had anything to eat because they were traveling and had low blood sugar. All those things. They didn't come to mind when they jumped the desk, but they came to mind to me afterwards. So if it's someone who's struggling with some mental health issues, not always. Some people are angry and all those things without living with a mental health condition, but they've already experienced discrimination, perhaps. Perhaps they've already been not noticed. Have you ever gone to a doctor's appointment, either with a family member that lives with a mental illness, maybe with an older adult family member? I have. And, the doctor turns and addresses the questions to you, who's the family member going with the person to the appointment, instead of to the person. And so my mom was an example. The doctor turned to me and asked a question. I said, well, my mom's right here. I said it politely, but my mom's right here. Why don't you ask her? okay? So even health professionals sometimes make a judgment. My sister has a little bit of dementia, but she can answer questions, but she's delayed in her answer. So sometimes people just raise their voice thinking it's a hearing issue. My sister's hearing is fine. And so she has a delay because it takes her brain a little bit to adjust to answer the question. And if you're an extrovert like I am, 30 seconds goes by with silence. I think that 2 hours have gone by. And so it's really important to really wait for the answer. And symptoms, if you hear voices, and today's not the day to explain psychosis, but sometimes people that live with a break from reality hear voices. You can have, a psychosis can include any of your senses can be affected, but the most common is to hear auditory, I should say, hallucinations. And visual hallucinations people can have. They also can have, touch, smell, taste, any of those things. And so people often ask, well, if someone's getting treatment for schizophrenia and they have auditory hallucinations, do they go away? Most people report that they're reduced, but not typically going away. So can you imagine if you're hearing voices, usually they're of negative things, not positive things. They aren't saying you're the best brother ever. You can see how can you concentrate on reading a book for school, or how can you concentrate on a work that you're doing safely on a construction site if you're hearing voices. So when you meet someone who lives with voices and they're receiving some treatment, you've met a pretty resilient person. You've met a pretty tremendous person because they've had to learn to manage symptoms that don't totally go away. Also, people often, that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we really have to have shelter for people. It's sort of shelter first, because how can you do all the other things, including make yourself safe in a domestic violence situation, unless you have a baseline safe place to live for you and your family? And there's lots of other difficulties in life. Poverty is just perhaps one thing, having multiple jobs, having broken relationships, all of those sorts of things can happen when you're managing an illness through a lifetime. So I gave you an example of being discounted, that you're invisible. I think sometimes, having someone angry at me is more than someone treating me as invisible. And there's historical trauma, there's microaggressions. I would say that my education in those areas was poor up until probably the last 10 years. And so I think we've learned more about that. And just, I just think of Sisyphus, trying to push the stone up the hill. But I go back to saying that if you've met someone who's lived with a mental illness or managed symptoms for a while, you've met a pretty resilient person. And I always, when I'm trying to help someone, I try to ask them, what works, because they probably know and they can give you some feedback. So in a first aid situation, if I was with somebody who had a panic attack, and panic disorder is a type of anxiety disorder, and they're having a panic attack and I'm a first aider, I might say, what has worked for you in the past? And they can usually give you some things and then you can assist. So remember why the person's calling. They're really trying to resolve a problem, an issue. Maybe they've lost a much needed benefit. If you don't get your paperwork in, our governments are kind of by the rules. And so to lose your SNAP food related, used to be called food stamps, to lose that would be devastating for someone. To lose a waiver that they have, like a caddy waiver, because paperwork didn't get in time or they can't find the paperwork. It's not like they will initiate it back into place after it's been canceled. It's really hard to make that happen. Some people have case managers, but case managers have huge loads, and not all case managers are superstars. There's, in all professions, there are people that are good, adequate, and superstars. People have been passed around. It's like, nope, you've called the wrong place, and they're on a burner phone. They don't have unlimited minutes. And so to be waiting on a phone that long and not having money for minutes on your phone, not having bus fare, so you've been sent from one agency and you have to get on the bus and go to another location. I'm just trying to tell you some of the things that help you with your empathy. Long waiting times, in person as well as on the phone, rules to follow. And if English isn't your first language, can you imagine? I speak Spanish, but not nearly as well as my colleague Renee does. And I have to say that I once had to go, I lived in Aruba and I managed a resort there. I went to a whole day conference in Spanish. And it's one thing to talk conversationally in Spanish, and it's another thing to try to absorb an 8-hour conference in Spanish. You know, it was beyond me. I was so tired, my brain was tired. And then someone just not listening, you know, they think they've heard it before. You know, I find myself sometimes when families call and say, you know, we have a family member that having some signs and symptoms, where do we go? How many times have I answered that question? Probably hundreds, thousands. But I need to speak as freshly as I did the first time I took a call like that, because it's new for this family that's calling to say, where do I start? And then, you know, if you've been mistreated and you've had microaggressions and you've all those things and you're not listened to, you can see where someone's frustration and anger, it's not just that day, it's been building perhaps. You know, one strategy is that I try not to take things personally. I really, it's kind of a mantra I say to myself. It's not about me. They're frustrated. They're angry. Again, going back to my analogy at the hotel front desk, I don't know how that day went for that person before they got to me. So, you know, even my mom, when she was symptomatic, she would from time to time lash out and say, I wish you were dead. I wish you were never born. And I'm trying to help her. Okay. Now, when you're a young kid, that's information that it doesn't get processed very well because you're young. So you have to get some therapy. But I'm saying as I got older, you know, I have to tell you this brief story. I was with my mom in the car and I was in my 20s and I was driving, and my mom said to me and caught me off guard. She said, I was a good mother, wasn't I? Now, an extrovert like me, I would have probably blurted out, hell no. But, you know, I clamped down on my tongue. I probably had blood in my mouth, but I clamped down on my tongue and I answered, I breathed and I said, you know, you did the best you could. And that was the right answer. You know, it didn't seem that way when I was younger because she lived with an illness which affected our whole family system. But my mom did not need her self-esteem to have that kind of hit like, hell no. Instead, I think I gave the right answer, right? You did the best you could. The other thing is that, you know, you try, you may have to do some breathing. You may have to occasionally put someone on mute so that they don't hear you exhaling for a moment. You can do that on Zoom too, I'm told. Okay, but, you know, you do your best. And so sometimes you have to reconvene. You know, if somebody's using a lot of anger with you, using foul language, you know, you need to follow the protocol standpoint or protocol of the other organizations that you work for. But I taught people that worked for me in the hotel business that they do not have to take that kind of abuse. You know, they can say on the phone to someone, you know, I'm terribly sorry, but until, you know, we're able to talk in conversational tones, or I'm very much offended by this language, I'd be happy to talk to you, but I need you to be able to talk to me in respectful language. And I'm going to hang up the phone now. You are welcome to call me back, but I'm going to hang up the phone now, and then let's talk when you're able to talk to me in a respectful voice or in a respectful language, right? Then, you know, try to just get the facts that you need, especially if there's a lot of anger, you know, just try to get what you need. And maybe you say, I will call you back. Now, if you say that, you need to call them back. If you say, I'm going to call you back by 1 o'clock, you need to call them back by 1 o'clock, right? And just remember that caller called because they need your help. And they may not express it in the terms you would express it, but you do the best you can. So you're trying to listen. You know, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And I always recommend that we listen twice as much as we talk. And when you're on the phone, you have to give some indication, of course, that you're listening, because they don't have all the other visual things to see. So polite, you know, be nice, you know, don't just smile. What is be nice, but be kind, be nice. And sometimes when you have someone that is escalating, just by lowering your voice, they have to listen. And so some of that helps to de-escalate. Be polite, you know, certainly you would not use someone's first name without them giving you the permission to do so. And sincere, you know, the people I enjoy most in life are interesting and interested. And so, you know, sometimes you ask a few questions to clarify, but that shows your interest as well. And when you're on Zoom, you might have to lean in, just like you might lean in if you were in person. You give full attention, eye contact. If someone's symptomatic, they'll help you gauge how much eye contact, because if they're suspicious or paranoid, maybe don't use as much full eye contact. There's cultural differences, so you want to respect things like eye contact based on culture. You try not to be defensive. It's hard, especially when someone is pushing your buttons. But you're not going to get anywhere if you retaliate back using their same bad language, using their same raised voice, etc. And I have to say, during COVID, my mantra, I've had to say this under my breath for 2 years. I don't get things back as quickly as I wanted them. I think I've given a colleague plenty of time to get something that I need back, that I need for my presentation. And I just have to say grace and space. We just don't know the backstory. And the same thing is true with callers. You just don't know. It's just a short part of their week, short part of their day, a short part of a whole lifetime that they may have struggled. I never promise things I can't do, so I may have to say, let me check on that for you. It's a trite thing to say, but come up with something other than that's above my pay grade. But you can say, I don't know the answer to that, but let me check with my supervisor. Or if they say, I want to talk to your supervisor, you can't help me with anything, then say, may I try? And then if we can't resolve this, I would happily put you in touch with my supervisor. If there's been a mistake, acknowledge it. I think we're tired of I'm sorry. It just seems like everything's I'm sorry. But you can say, it sounds like we didn't do this. And so for that, I'm terribly sorry. We'd like to make it right. Okay? And so get those out so that they hear that I'd like to make it right. Now, the other thing is it's really helpful in an organization to really have some policies that you follow. So at the front desk of a hotel, any of my supervisors at the front desk had, and this is 20 years ago, had the authorization to make a decision of $100 or less. They didn't have to talk to a manager. They didn't have to have a sign off. We had trained them of things that they could handle themselves and make their own decisions. Not only does that empower your employees and lets them feel like they're responsible and that you trust them, but also we don't need to call a supervisor. So you set some guidelines of, when do you need to go to the supervisor? And what can you make decisions on yourself on the phone? And it's good for callers to also know what the process is, because sometimes the process wasn't something you set. You didn't set it. And it's really, if it was your business, you probably wouldn't have set this hard process. But it is the process at your company. And until your company or your organization changes their process, or the government says we can do it a different way, let them know that here is the process. So, and then help them so that they know what to expect. Like, it's going to take a day for my supervisor to call you back. And here, once you submit your paperwork, you will hear from us in 2 weeks. Things like that. And again, you need to tell them, I'm trying my hardest to resolve this. If it's something that we can't resolve, then here's the next step that I'm going to take. If we lose each other in our connection, do you mind if I get your phone number? Because not everything has caller ID. Can I get a phone number for you? The reason I'm asking for it, I'm not going to use it from a privacy standpoint, but if we get disconnected, I want to be able to call you back. Because can you imagine someone having to call back and go through the phone tree again for 30 minutes? Now, I'm going to keep going. We actually are going to have a little time for you to share some things that have worked yourself when you've had phone calls with difficult callers. But does anybody have any questions about things or comments about things I've made mention of in the last 5 or 6 slides?
I am watching the chat. It's a Q&A. Please feel free to type in your questions. I'm happy to share them.
Okay.
Not currently seeing anything though.
Okay, thanks. So active listening.
I take that back, Kay. We just got one.
Thank you.
Let's see. What strategies can you recommend when trying to help a caller who is seeking help but seems to be reacting to paranoid thinking, where they describe situations that seem realistically impossible? For example, describing the idea that people are coming into the caller's home all of the time, or ideas like the caller has been injected with drugs, teeth have been implanted with a bug, etc.
Yeah. To be honest, that's going to be pretty hard to handle on the phone. But I think that you want to reassure the person, because can you imagine how terrifying any of those things that were just described, how terrifying that would be, because they're real for that person. So you don't have to agree. That's why I like that book, I Am Not Sick, I Don't Need Help. It's by Javier Amador, Amador. I Am Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, because you can hear even in their voice, their distress. So you can say something like, you must be very scared. I hear in your voice that you must be very scared to think, and then fill in one of those sentences. And so you can say, you know, I'd like to try to get some help for you, but to do so, would you be okay if? And so certainly one of the options you have, if someone is in that great deal of distress, say, do you have a family member that lives nearby, or do you live with someone that you could share your concerns with? So in other words, I don't think you're going to be able to do this on the phone. Let's say you think they're a harm to themselves on this call, for example. You can say, would you be okay if together we called the county crisis number for Hennepin County? And I'd like you to just tell them some of the things that you've said to me. Is that okay? Because you have to have permission. People don't want unsolicited advice, even people who are not able to process very well. So you need to get permission. But I don't think you're going to be able to do much about that on the phone, but you can say, do you have family that might be able to help you with this distress? And then once you get some help in person with that, then perhaps we can give you some resources at this agency that you've just called. So I would handle it that way, because this one, without a camera, without seeing them, you're not going to be able to do all of those things. The other thing is that, people are afraid that, the crisis team, they don't want someone coming. So you do have to ask permission. And if they're in harm to themselves because they have suicidal thoughts, then I want you to take a suicide prevention class, because you probably will be intervening. But if it's not that, you can just say, during this time, we're not able to meet with you, but is there someone that we can help coach that, lives with you, or someone we can help coach that does visit you, during this time, since we aren't making in-person calls? Do you have an ability to use a device so that we can set an appointment where you have access to a personal computer or a tablet? Because at least then you can have some conversation with them. And the crisis teams for the counties are mostly mobile, not in every county in the state. Some are only by phone, but some are mobile. But again, you need to let them know and announce the protocol that you're going to follow. Did that help a little bit? I wish it was just a simple answer. These are complicated conversations. So paraphrasing is helpful because it allows a person to correct you if you didn't hear something properly. So I paraphrase, but you need to know, for example, when my mom was symptomatic, my mom would say, "What are you, a parrot?" Now, my mom typically would not talk disrespectfully in that respect to me, but, it's not that the person has lost any intellect. It's just that sometimes I try to talk slowly. I try to keep things kind of simple, and I'm not trying to dumb something down so that someone feels disrespected, but I try to make things simple, because a lot of things may be going on in their brain where it's hard to concentrate. And occasionally I'll throw in a question to show, that I'm listening, of course. And you do have to come up, if you're not on a camera, you're going to have to use some verbal words so that they know you're listening, which could include asking a question. Just say, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but could I just ask, I didn't quite understand what you just said." Repeat it back as a paraphrase, and then perhaps ask your question. That way they know you're listening. So it's okay. I don't know without saying, "That's really a good question. Let me check and find out. May I call you back? Or can I put you on hold for 2 minutes? If we get disconnected, could I have a phone number for you?" So I don't know. It's okay to admit that you don't know something, but instead, "Good question. I'm not sure about that. Let me check and find out." And then, you'll have to do this. Very accusatory. So here's how we can help you. It's just a reframing. And, the old proverbial is telling people, what to do. You need to. And so, we found from experience that it usually works best if it's reframing. And then this one's really great, isn't it? If what you say is correct, you're basically saying they're a liar. If what you say is correct, I apologize. not helpful. You know, it's customer service here. You know, at NAMI, I don't think we think of people that are calling us for information as customers, but I came from a business background. And so there are customers. We exist to help people with education, support, and advocacy. So they're not making my day bad by calling and asking me to help them for 20 minutes. Yes, I have many things to do and we get hundreds of calls, so I can't give everybody 20 minutes, but I can say, I'm sorry, I have to take another call on the helpline, but I think if you consider our family-to-family class, many of these questions will be answered for you. Here is the link to the class that's going to be starting in a month. Would that be helpful to you? At this time, I have to take the next call. So sometimes you're giving them a resource that will answer some of their questions that you can't at that moment answer all of them. And instead of please hold, could I briefly put you on hold? I think it's going to take me about 3 minutes to get a hold of an answer for your question. If that's too long, could I have a phone number that I can call you back? Or can you give me an email? I think, you be as optimistic and upbeat. If you're hiring against someone that's working, on a helpline, for example, you're looking for certain traits. You can't smile your way. I think Renee did a nice job. You can't smile your way, out of a mental health concern when you have acute symptoms, but it can't hurt for it to be a good day when you're a customer service person helping. And, you certainly thank people for calling. And don't use this as a throwaway line. Thank you for letting us know that when you get a hold of NAMI, it goes into voicemail right away. We didn't know that. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. We'll try to get rid of that bug. Are you open for some suggestions? I have some resources. Would you like some of those resources? Because again, nobody likes unsolicited advice. Someone like me loves giving it, but you need to ask for permission. Just because they called doesn't mean they want unsolicited advice. It just means that they called for maybe something more specific. So these are just some strategies to do that. How can I help? And you won't always have a solution, but you may be able to give them a resource that can do something more specific that you're not able to do. At NAMI, we're not therapists, so we're actually giving resources to people. We're not trying to solve problems. And I'm sorry that we've lost Maya Angelou. She has so many good quotes, but I agree with this one, and I hope you do too. At the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or did, but they will remember how you made them feel. And I always say when someone starts at a new job, how you onboard them is as important as when they leave the job. Not just an exit interview, but how they felt as they left you, because they're your ambassadors. They're going to tell people, that was a great place to work. I got a better job, or I'm getting more money at my new place, but, you'd like working there. Nice people. And so it's because those are the feelings that you went away with. So sometimes you just have people that are angry. They don't even give you time for breath. They don't breathe, so you can't get in a word in edgewise. So I think the last bullet point's one of the most important. Imagine yourself in the caller's shoes. I try to, be calm. I try to lower my voice. I try not to escalate it to the voice that they are using if they're angry. After they've told you your concerns, if it's true, say, I understand your concerns, and then repeat them back to make sure you captured them. And say, I do want to help. Let's try to resolve this. And you can't go wrong when you go with the feelings. You must be just beyond yourself to be worried now that your son has suicidal thoughts and they turned you away from the emergency room. You must be just so worried that your identity and where you're living is going to be given to the perpetrator, or that it's going to be given out inadvertently. Go with the feeling. So you want to get them down to a conversational level before you try to problem solve. And you may have to repeat yourself. Sometimes when I teach, I'll say, untreated depression is a high risk factor for suicide. And I will say, let me repeat that again. Untreated, underlined untreated, is a high risk factor for suicide. Now, you're going to laugh at the last bullet point on this slide. Sarcasm, if you think about it, is really hard for people where English is a second language. So I'm going to do an exaggerated example. So let's say that someone has symptoms of psychosis and they think that I, their neighbor, are a police officer. And I go, yeah, I'm a police officer. They know you, you're their neighbor, but right now they perceive you as a police officer. And so if I say, yeah, I'm a police officer, my body language, my tone of voice, and what I said should have told them that's sarcasm, right? But sarcasm for English as a second language, you've told them I'm a police officer. They may not have caught all the other nuances. I said, yeah, I'm a police officer. I mean the opposite. So sarcasm is not very helpful. It's not a very good type of humor for anyone in general, but when someone is having psychosis, it's particularly hard. They might think you're laughing at them. And so humor often goes over the head of someone who has a break from reality. And intense questioning is not helpful. It just isn't. It's too much. The brain is on overload. And, we don't want to threaten, if you drive drunk again with our kids in the back seat, you will never see our children again. That's a lot of you statements. It's so much better to say, I was so scared that you drove away with one of the kids in the back and you're under the influence. They're not going to like hearing that either, but you statements are so accusatory, and I statements at least hopefully get the conversation still going. So I think it's important in an organization to have what I call playing tape. I'm an athletic enthusiast. And so, you watch game tape afterwards to learn from that game so that you can improve your game. I think, when you're a therapist, when they have hard clients, they sit down with other therapists and talk through the case with the supervisor. But I think in your organization, after you've taken a particularly hard call or you've met with someone and it's been emotionally draining, because it is draining, then you need to have a way to formalize and talk through that, maybe to problem solve a little bit with your coworkers so that you could maybe have different outcomes, and just to process how that went, that call, or how it went in person. So it's important to have some of those strategies. So use your brain more than your heart. You still need to use your heart, but in emergency situations, sometimes we use more of our brain. Breathing exercises are helpful. You want to use diaphragmatic breathing. You may have to take a walk. You may need to shake it off that way. Some of the self-care strategies that work for you. You may need to use your employee assistance program to do a little bit of coaching as it relates to your job. Employee assistance programs have counseling sessions, and I hope perhaps, I didn't ask Nikki if Standpoint has an employee assistance program, but if it does, please take advantage of it. She shook her head yes, so that's good. And, learn to forgive, even if it's a stranger, but maybe it's not a stranger. That's a hard one, but it's good for your own health to do forgiveness. And that's why when I hear about restorative justice and things like that, I haven't been in that situation, but I think, could I, forgive someone that has killed my family member? I like to think yes, but I don't know. I haven't been in that situation. And now we're not talking life or death here, but I do think it's important with that. Reasonable requests. I've had to do many in life, and there's lots of rules. My sister has been in an emergency room where we didn't get her up to a bed as quickly as she needed. And there were other emergencies that came first, and my sister, was beside herself with her symptoms. And my sister wanted to smoke, and she doesn't smoke anymore, but she did at the time. Outside the emergency room at that hospital, I bummed cigarettes. They don't sell cigarettes in the gift shop at hospitals. I'm being the smart aleck. But so I was trying to buy cigarettes off people because my sister needed to pace and smoke. And I thought that was a pretty reasonable request. She had just come from her husband's funeral. So now we are run out of time. That's always the situation. But I hope as a team that you'll maybe talk about some strategies you've used, not today, but you'll talk about some strategies that were helpful for you, and teach your colleagues and share what's worked very specific to, domestic violence and sexual assault, and calls, because I think it's helpful to learn from each other and what strategies have worked. You need to use your own words, but I think you'll get some idea of phrasing and things like that from your colleagues and your supervisors. Now, my message is mental illnesses are treatable. Take good care of yourself. You work in hard work. I'm not sure I could do your work. You know, I think mental health issues are hard, but I know for a fact I couldn't be a therapist. I can educate people about it, but I don't know if I could be a therapist. And I think in your work, you see people at their hardest times of life, you know, the hardest times. So self-care is really, really very important because it's trite, but you can't help someone until you have your own oxygen mask on in the airline, and then you turn to help the person in the seat next to you. As trite as it is, it's true. You know, you have to be at your best to be able to help someone who's had their worst day of their life. So I appreciate your time for both sessions. Take advantage of our other resources. And I'm going to quickly skip to and breathe the slide with my email again. There is an evaluation form, and it's going to be both in the chat, but Nikki's going to send it out also. We'd be grateful if you filled it out because we apply for grants and we use aggregate data from our presentations and things. So we'd be grateful. Reach out to me if I can help you with a resource for your own family or for other parts of your life. Thank you so much, Nikki. I'll stay on, for a minute or so, but I know people need to head out. And it's hailing where I am. I don't know where you are, but it is hailing really hard. Woo!
I'm getting sunshine right now, so might be coming my way, but we did put that evaluation in the chat. So if you'll take a minute to fill that out before you leave, we'd really appreciate that. Otherwise, if you have questions, please feel free to unmute and ask them or put them in the chat.
And the electronic responses, they come to us, in a database. So if you need to head out to an appointment and things, you can do it later, but it's better to do it now. That's what I like about Nikki. It's better to do it now because then other stuff comes up.
So we'll hang out for 2 more minutes if you've got questions, but we're going to go ahead and stop the recording now. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope you'll join us next month for Standpoint's next webinar.